guys. However, when you go down to the value chain, when you move out of model building, we actually see at the data collection level, at the annotation level, at the platform-based gig work level, women are actually very heavily represented. Now, this dichotomy indicates something really important. Women are present in the AI economy, but sadly, they are concentrated in some of its least visible segments. We have to move beyond seeing women as only workers in the AI value chain. They're a lot more than that. They are fundamentally knowledge holders. They know the subtleties of their languages, they know how norms operate inside families and communities, and they hold practical, community-grounded knowledge. A knowledge and context that AI systems cannot learn from code or scraping data. This is the gap that we have today. If we continue down this path, at best, we're gonna risk building systems that are technically sophisticated, but socially really shallow. And at the worst, we're gonna create technologies that actively do not work or speak to women's experiences. We have an opportunity to go beyond expanding women's participation in the AI economy as simply a workforce. We have to intentionally design AI systems to incorporate women's contextual knowledge from the start. We need to translate lived experiences into evaluation frameworks. We need to ask different questions during model development. And we need to create and source our training data more intentionally. Fundamentally, we must recognize that local knowledge is not anecdotal. It is infrastructure for an AI that truly works for everyone. And today, this is not happening at the scale that it really needs to. Many gender considerations are only layered on after deployment as audits and patches and compliance exercises, but we need to move this upstream to design, governance, and evaluation. This session is fundamentally an invitation to rethink all of this. We want to explore what it means to move from invisible to visible, from participation to power, and from extraction to ownership. I'm going to open with two scenes from the critically acclaimed film Humans in the Loop that talks a little bit about the data generation pipeline, but also the humans that are there behind our data sets. We're then going to move on to a wonderful panel discussion that we're going to have, and I'll very shortly introduce our speakers. And we're going to close with a very short demonstration that shows what can actually be built if we decide to center communities and women. So with that, I am going to move us on to putting the clips. Sorry, give us 1 minute. Sorry. Although I, do lead a technology company, I really have to rely on my co-founder to help with the actual tech. So thank you, Manu. The one that says part 1. Yeah, part 1. Amazing. Oh yeah, rewind, please. I promise this will get more seamless as we go. Amazing, thank you.
इतनी देर तक क्या कर रही हो? टास्क नहीं हुआ अभी? आज के टास्क का यूज जानती हो? नहीं? रुको मैं दिखाती हूँ. तो ये एक AI आर्ट जनरेटर है. अपना प्रोटोटाइप टेस्ट करना चाहती है? ये जो तुम फोटो, पेंटिंग, लेबल कर रहे हो ना, ये सब मिला के वो अपना एक AI पेंटिंग बना रहे. तुम्हारी पेंटिंग बनवाए? आओ. क्या आता है देखते हैं. अरे ट्राइबल लिखने से ऐसे, पर ऐसा होना तो नहीं चाहिए. इंडियन ट्राइबल डाल के देखते हैं. सर्च स्पेक्ट्रम शायद थोड़ा बड़ा हो जाए. अरे ये तो अमेरिकन नेटिव इंडियन जैसी इमेज है ना? क्या हुआ है नीमू? परेशान? तुमने उस दिन सही कहा था। एआई एक बच्चे की तरह है, हम उसे गलत सिखाएंगे तो गलत सीख जाएगा। पर हम गलती कहाँ कर रहे हैं पता है? क्लाइंट की दी हुई डाटा इसको फीड कर रहे हैं। उसके बदले अगर हम हमारे आसपास की फोटो वीडियो उस पे फिट करवा पाते ना, तो शायद हमारे जैसा ही वो रिजल्ट देता। नहीं, यही तो तुम बोलना चाह रही थी ना?
Thank you. I think, please. What a powerful scene. In this scene, I think we see a little bit of an example where AI doesn't do a good job in catching where context lies. I won't show you, obviously, the rest of the movie, but it should make you happy to know that she does go on to tag, collect a lot of women, a lot of photos of tribal women, and eventually improve that model. But unfortunately, given that we're short of time, I won't be able to show that clip. But I think it's just such a visceral reminder of what can happen when we fundamentally include community knowledge, or in this case, when we forget to. And now I think I'm extremely honored to move on to the most exciting part of this, which is going to be our panel discussion. Our panelists are already here on stage, but I'd just like to take a few minutes to introduce each of them to you. So very first, we have Sachi Bhala, all the way over there on the left. She is Deputy Director of Gender Equity at the Gates Foundation, where she is shaping systems-level approaches to gender-inclusive development. Right after that, we have Dr. Shiko Gitao, please give a little hi, founder and CEO of Kala, where she is working to shape Africa's digital transformation with a real focus on employment and inclusive growth. Next, we have Dr. Kalika Bali, senior principal researcher at Microsoft Research, and a global leader in multilingual and inclusive AI. Next, we have Dr. Urvashi Aneja, founder and the executive director of Digital Futures Lab, and a leading voice on AI governance and digital labor. And finally, but definitely not least, the wonderful director of this film that you saw today, Aranya Sahe. Amazing. So I think in the interest of being more with you all as a panel, I will come sit here for the rest of the discussion. I think to begin with, I actually wanted to start all of us off with a little bit of an energizer. So there's 3 words I'm starting us all off with: women and AI. How does this feel for you? Power or precarity? If you can all just speak on this maybe for 1 to 2 seconds, a few words. We can start perhaps with Sachi.
For me, I think it's precarity, but also opportunity. And I'll just say maybe a sentence about this. Today, even in the non-AI economy, women are often invisible, and they are in informal jobs and not necessarily, have pay parity. And so I think that we run the risk of like continuing on that trajectory. And at the same time, we are also in the space where traditional methods of talent seeking is changing. And formal education is not necessarily a guarantee of success. So if we can actually think a little bit about how do we ensure that we are including women in the process and creating space for their leadership, then we get to power.
Beautiful. I love the trajectory. Arna, you want to go next, and we can go down the line.
I think power and possibility, especially, I mean, this scene itself, and another scene in the film where she speaks about a pest not being a pest. I don't know how many of you have seen the film. It really comes from one of my interactions with a data labeler who was told to label a specific crop for a specific season. And she told, and this is an indigenous woman, and she told her manager that ma'am wo us season mein dalenge so it will not be as productive and as flourishing as the other. So I think there lies a great opportunity and there lies a great possibility.
Absolutely. So precality and opportunity, I'm with her. And I'll do this in terms of a story, two types of stories. Same scene, real life. In 2023, when Midjourney came out, some researchers in Oxford went online and searched for a black doctor treating a child in Africa. Several times. And if you've seen me, I have a presentation with actual pictures of it. And every single time, Midjourney refused to give them a black doctor treating a white child. And eventually, they added traditional doctor, and of course, they got a medicine man wearing like traditional wear. That's part one. Part two, last year at UNGA, amazing panel of powerful women from big tech. And this woman from a very well-known organization speaks about her challenges. She's going through menopause, premenopausal, so she wants an app. I mean, you have an app for everything, right? So she wants an app to help her through her premenopausal supplements and hormones and whatever. And she goes through this process of building with her team an app to support her. They did everything right by the book. It still got wrong.
Wow.
And I'll leave you that. And final question, and I know Jackie is here. So a few years ago, a lot of years ago, I worked for Microsoft. And as part of that, we worked with this team that was doing mobile development for informal communities. Again, they designed this amazing app for community health workers who are primarily women. The women never used the app. Why? Because the realities of women are not caught. In the second case is women, if you're a community health worker in an informal community, even here in India, where do you hide your phone? Only women. Do you have an answer for that? Where do you hide your phone? In your bra. I can see all the women and men are like, what's happening? And so when this app was built, it was put in a very big font, so it was hard to hide under your breast. And the second part, the menopausal women, is all the data that was used to train this app was male data. So while there's this great opportunity, there's this gulf, I don't even call it a gap, there's this gulf of uncertainty and lack of data and lack of power to be able to define the future of what women can do, but we can correct that. Yes.
So right, and it's sad that we haven't, I think, made many strides. But that's the purpose of this panel, to encourage all of us. Urvashi?
Thanks, Safia, and thanks for having me on this panel. I think there will always be stories about women who benefit from AI, and there will always be stories about women who are not benefiting from AI. There will be stories of power, and there will be stories of precarity. But I think it's really important that we don't let those individual stories, those anecdotes, become our substitute for kind of structural social system analysis, which looks at the longer arc of where we're headed. And I think if we look at that longer arc of where we're headed, we see that in the current AI ecosystem, AI systems are reproducing inequality, they are centralizing power, they're creating systems of epistemic injustice,
They're creating new forms of vulnerability, and it is those who are marginalized already that are disproportionately impacted by those new vulnerabilities, including women. So I just want us to be really wary of the extent to which we let individual stories of both power and precarity define our understanding, as well as what we need to do next to change the arc of current AI and society trajectories.
Kalika.
Yeah, I kind of agree with Urvashi a lot on this. Um, a lot of storytelling is important to emphasize, where things are going right and where things are going wrong. But the fact remains that, general trajectory is not moving much further. And it's not just AI, I would just like to get people to get this perspective that this has been happening pre-AI. This has been happening with other kind of technological advancements, quote unquote. So this is not very new for AI. What is new for AI is that, at least with other technological development, it was about putting technology in the hands of women, building with for women, with women, etc. Having ethnographic practices that allowed you to get insights to put into your technology. But with AI, what's happening is that it's being done at such scale. The data requirements are at such humongous volumes, that there is, while I personally do think AI is, can be used as a tool for opportunity development, etc., etc. It has great potential, but there is a great danger that um, you know, because of these requirements, because of how AI is built, it is very easy to kind of overlook, uh, especially not. I mean, I would say all um, minority or marginalized communities, but especially women, the biggest minority community in the world.
Absolutely. And thank you for bringing up the, I guess, theme of being overlooked, because I think that's kind of where I'd like to start us off. And actually, Aranya, I think if we can start with you. So I think, obviously, we saw a very critical moment of your film today. And I think, in general, your film is really bringing to light hidden human labor, right? Especially that we have in systems like AI. So I'm curious, why do you think this labor, and specifically I think women's labor, remains largely invisible and unseen in mainstream AI discourse?
I think it's a two-pronged thing to tackle. One, the invisibility comes from structural. It's a structural issue. Another, it's happening by default, and but that is also embedded in some kind of structure. Uh, an industry which flaunts itself on automation, an industry that talks about the magical touch of intelligence and the magical touch of automation will obviously would not want to front the invisible work that's going on in it. And another part to it, I would say, is certainly that any industry tries to hide their factories, tries to hide their backends, and it is the same with this. And I think it is an aesthetic of automation, aesthetic of intelligence, that puts that puts all the laurels of AI in the global north, and then puts the labor on the global south. And that's what we try to attempt in the film as well.
No, I think that's such a great point, right? And when we really think about, centering humans in these spaces, we do typically think about, like, okay, what are the big unions or things like that in the global north sharing, but we do often forget the often very amazing and critical work that's being done.
Safia, if I may just,
Please.
before making this film, I also used to think that algorithms learn on their own, right? And most of us, I guess, if you've not engaged with AI, we would think that.
Yeah.
But and only gradually did I understand through Mary L. Gray's work, ghost work, did I. And in fact, I also have to say one of the first text that I read was actually one of your case studies, one of Karya's case studies, and Gates
Thank you.
Foundation also went along for me. There's a lot of that interaction there.
But huge shout out for Ghost Work. If anyone has the opportunity to read it, please do. So I think we talked a little bit about the foundations on the human side, but there's also foundations on the data side as well. So Kalika, my next question is for you. I'm kind of curious to understand, data is fundamentally something that is developed by or is telling the story of a human in some way. What do you believe either changes or could change when we actually recognize not only data workers, but especially female data workers as contributors of knowledge and judgment?
Yeah, I think the clip was very demonstrative of that. So here's the thing: like, if you have women doing certain tasks, say data, looking at data, evaluating outputs, etc., the perspective that they have would be very different. And I'm not saying like this is not like men versus women kind of a thing, but they actually pick on things that are important for them. And that is a good way to kind of make sure that the things that are being underrepresented in the data are a part of the data, right? So that's what I think. I think another good example of that would be what the cook, the recipes project that was, that's such a favorite project of mine. I mean, you had people go there and ask them to talk about the ingredients which are local to them, right? You had them cook the recipes, right? And these weren't like typed out recipes. This is somebody who's standing there and kind of actually making the thing, doing a video saying, now you put this, very much like a YouTube video on recipes, but these were very, very, how do I say, very, very unique and very, very unknown kind of knowledge bases, if techie coming in. But, the knowledge was so different, and it was an eye-opener even for me. I had no idea about the kind of, knowledge it kind of like encapsulated, because there were also these ingredients which talked about like, this is good in this season, this you cannot get in this season, this is good for this health purpose, right? And by just like getting the women to talk about their daily thing, we were able to capture a lot of such knowledge. So I think that's what I think, like.
No, I think absolutely, absolutely. Thank you, Kalika. So maybe stepping again a level higher away from the data layer, I now want to talk a little bit about governance. And Urvashi, this is a question for you. I know at DFL you've really helped shape how we think about AI governance across the global majority. So I'm curious to see, where do you see structural blind spots in the current conversations or the current structures that we have, especially if you can comment around gender? And why and how do you think we are actually treating legitimate versus illegitimate inputs?
I'll respond to your question, but I also want to tie it back a little bit to what Kalika was saying. So from a governance perspective, as someone who's generally of AI governance, which is generally in the space of looking at the governance of digital technologies, one of the things that we see is that representation has to come alongside a redistribution of power. Representation in itself does not redistribute power. And in fact, when representation comes without that redistribution of power, representation can easily become tokenism and give us the false impression that we're actually making progress. In fact, I think representation without that redistribution of power can even be dangerous. So I want to take it back to what Kalika was saying and also take it back to the documentary. So definitely we see, you know, when we use Mid-Journey or one of these things, you put in Indian woman, tribal woman, you see the picture of a white woman, and it definitely makes sense to try and build more representative data sets. And one of the ways to do that is to make sure that the folks who are doing the data annotation work represent a wider representation of society, right? But the danger there is that when you live in an environment where there is state surveillance, for an example, where you have strict immigration control, building that data set of marginalized populations is actually quite risky, right? Because then you're actually creating the basis for those technologies which are harmful to human rights to actually work really well, and we may not want them to work so well. So for an example, I would be much happier if facial recognition doesn't do what it's supposed to do in certain contexts, right? So it's just a small example of that. If you don't think about that superstructure, representation can actually be harmful. So again, also to pick up on the recipe example, it is amazing that we would have our cultural traditions now represented in AI systems, right? And they're coded and they're available. But if we don't think about who uses that data, then we also create a situation where you have large companies marketing your grandmother's recipe to you at $5, and you have a Swiggy that can deliver to you in under 10 minutes, right? Then the cost of digitalizing that oral tradition is immense. Right? So I just feel like and this is from a governance perspective, like we have to think of representation and the social structures that redistribute power equally. Otherwise, we might actually be doing more damage to all the good work that we are doing.
Can I just also add to what she said? Because the thing is that the people who are doing this let's represent the women in the databases kind of work are not the people who are kind of, brokering the power relationships. So there is that kind of a disconnect, and I really don't know what a good answer to that is, that to kind of, go from let's have women represented in the data to actually let's give women power.
Yeah, and creating safeguards. I mean, I don't think there is an answer, but I know that just for any of you who are interested, there are a few interesting examples and attempts at this. I think specifically New Zealand has very much tried to protect the Maori culture this way. So I would encourage all of you to check that out. My next question, though, is for you, Shiko. So I know, as you know, I think you are leading Kala in a moment where Africa is really rapidly digitizing. But I think there's also, as it is with many countries in the global majority, definitely unemployment challenges. So how are you rethinking, or how are you thinking about reshaping digital infrastructure so that it actually expands and creates meaningful employment? And if you can particularly, speak on women, that would be
Awesome. So, I mean, I was following what you have. Can you hear me? It
we
works?
can all hear?
Okay. The conversation. So I was hoping somebody will pick this. Is not only is women a type of hidden labor, but there's like a two-layer hidden labor. So we did some work between 2020 and 2024 around platform livelihoods. This before AI became what AI is known of today. And we were trying to track the lives of women who were working in the digital space, because the goal was to how do we recreate this digital space to employ women more, to create more dignified work for women. Yeah. And we did this study and found out a very painful insight that women might want to label these images correctly. Yeah. That's what they want because they know they're being misrepresented. A black girl back in my village might want to do it the right way, but she has to make money to feed her child, right? And what does she do? She cannot own an account by herself, like one of those labeling accounts. She cannot own it by herself. Why? Because if you put an African girl's and female name in the profile creation, you get less work. So they have to pass on like mostly a Filipino boy or an Indian boy actually to be able to get great work, which means that even the kind of labeling she has to do to get the kind of quality work to get paid is different. So she's biased, she's put in a corner to be able to produce this kind of work so she can feed her family. Yeah? So it's those double layers that you have to think about it. And we always make fun of it. Like when you think about ChatGPT, when I produce a paper that I've written by myself, I always say, when you run my PhD, which was done like 15 years ago on ChatGPT test, you'll find that I actually plagiarized using ChatGPT 90%. Why? And ChatGPT did not exist at that time. Why? Because they say it speaks like the English that ChatGPT speaks is like a Kenyan person. Why? Because it's primarily being labeled by these women. But when you go to the system to check who actually labeled this, it's Filipino boys and Indian boys. So you have to think about that. So when you're thinking about structural barriers, you have to think from that point of view is how does representation actually mean, going back to what she said, actually mean? Because yes, these women are making money, and when you look at the numbers, they're quite attractive. Yes, I mean, there are many New York Times articles saying it's $2 an hour as opposed to $14. But when you look accumulatively, to a Kenyan person taking home $700 to $1,000 a month, it's pretty decent, to be honest. But at what cost? The cost of their authenticity. So when you're talking about that, what are the things that we need to put in place? Is putting in place mechanisms to be able to protect women who are working in the digital space from a policy point of view. So Kenya is one of the front runners by far when it comes to digital economy. Kenya does not still have labor laws protecting digital workers.
Wow.
Now you can think about Benin and Mali and other small countries that are not there yet. So putting like policies and governance places in place, but also putting accountability to the people who are producing this technology, including Career, is to be able to make sure that representation is not just whenever they get these data sets from a Filipino boy or an Indian boy, they're saying, did they do actual this work? And how do we encourage more African girls or Indian girls to be able to participate in this work such that their voice is also captured in the labeling of this work? That's what I would say.
That's such a, I think that's such an illuminating anecdote. And I love this, I mean, it's unfortunate, but I love this thought of looking at the duality of the workforce. Thank you so much. So Sachi, I think my next question is for you. I think we're obviously at a huge inflection point in terms of how work is actually going to be structured, right, in the overall AI economy. So I'm curious, from a philanthropy, but maybe more so a systems perspective, what does a gender intentional transition towards centering women actually look like? And specifically, how do you feel this looks in the global majority?
Thank you. And first, I want to say thank you to Urvashi for just introducing and framing that point around representation and redistribution of power, because I think that is really the central question, not just for AI, but I think generally across the world. So I think the idea around how do we make sure that there is intentionality in this space, first is, I think, recognizing women as economic actors, not as beneficiaries, not as a vulnerable community. Yes, they are a underrepresented community. Yes, they are a marginalized community. Yes, they are a minority. But if we need to turn that around, we need to recognize them as clear economic actors. And I think in that form, the work that we've been doing at the Gates Foundation in support of the Government of India's program around women's livelihoods, especially in rural areas, the National Rural Livelihoods Mission is a clear example of where some of this is possible. And I think what the National Rural Livelihoods Mission does is look at collectivization of women, ensuring that there is social protection programs reaching women, but really critically ensuring that women have access to livelihoods and connecting them with financial inclusion, capital, as well as markets. I think I'll just take this as an example to sort of say what is possible and how we can actually think about AI and looking at how women can actually, how can we make sure that women go from being this invisible labor to actually growing in the system and really emerging as leaders with power. So, and I think this is work that Karya has also done. This is work that the Government of India is leading. It's important work. We are looking at how to make sure that women are shapers of AI, of technology. We're looking at how do we not ignore that there is a large care burden that women also bear, and the fact that women don't necessarily have individual devices. So, how do you function in the context of shared devices? What does that mean for work? What does that mean for identity, especially when it comes to your work? And how can you actually, in this context, shape the work that women do? But I think it's also really important over here to say that we need to make sure that you're thinking about institutions or platforms that allow you to engage with women in that context. So it's not just again about what value do you bring, but it's also about, are you able to actually increase your agency? Are you able to increase your bargaining power? And I think communities or community institutions and platforms allow you to do that. So I think that's really the opportunity that we have here. We talk about it in the broader economic context as well. Someone mentioned unions earlier. Where are the unions? There are no unions, I think, in this space. But when you work with an NRLM, when you work with a self-help group or a community or the federated structures, there is a collective power that comes through that. And then lastly, I think we need to start measuring this. The space is moving very fast. And I think you're going to talk a little bit about this later, about having the right language and the right tools to be able to actually see where do we sit today, what are the types of measures or indicators we should be looking at, and then track progress. And I think that's the piece that maybe we need to get faster at, right? Like we can't just sit back and let the world change around us. We need to have the shared language, we need to have the shared resources, we need to have a community that's able to actually measure this progress and then call out when things are not necessarily moving in the right direction.
No, I think such a good point about, I guess, thinking how we actually measure and define these things, because otherwise it just sits there in the ether, right? What does representation mean if that's not something that we're going to critically look at and say, is that fundamentally something that is safe or not? So I think, Urvashi, maybe back to you. I'm kind of curious to know, okay, you definitely mentioned, I think, representation as a double-sided coin and potentially a real risk for women, not only in the informal economy, but also in the platform economy. What other kinds of risks do you see? And have you seen any examples of a regulatory practice or a policy response that actually gets to the root of these kinds of currently, I think, invisible challenges that a lot of women face?
You mean specifically to platform work and
I think the general AI economy.
yeah. I mean, I think it's there's a lot of good research now to show that platform work, gig work, creates a lot of precarity for workers, whether it's in terms of low wages or irregular work or algorithmic management systems. And I think that precarity is accentuated for women. So if you think of something like task-based remuneration or platform work essentially being a set of tasks, right? A set of gigs. So there's no job security, there's no income security. And then if you think about the care work that women have to do, that means in many cases they simply will not be able to complete those tasks. They might need to stop working for a period of time, but they're not getting a regular income. Right? So they don't have the kind of social protection that would come with regular employment or kind of formal employment, which becomes really important for women to be able to create a buffer for something like care work, for an example, right? Or when you think about things like algorithmic management systems, we know that, algorithms, they're basing it on kind of proxies, right? So and the proxies may not actually be designed to capture the nuance of a woman's life. So we've seen, for an example, a lot of platforms tie up with fintech providers so that they can use the platform workers' usage data as a way to assess the creditworthiness of that platform, and then that becomes a way that the fintech provider can provide this person access to credit. But the proxies that are used to kind of decide on creditworthiness are often imported from somewhere else, or they're based on an assumption of a man. So, this woman does not leave her house every day. There is no bus ticket, for an example, that's been bought. So that might mean that she's not working, right? So algorithmic decision management systems, employee management systems are not designed to capture the particular kind of lives of women, right? So I think in these are some of the ways in which the precarity for women does increase. In terms of things that I think might help or kind of regulatory interventions, India is doing some interesting things, I think, in trying to bring visibility to platform workers. Some of the new, even in the Indian Economic Survey that recently came out, there was a recognition of these issues around kind of algorithmic management, workplace surveillance. So I think there are some interesting kind of interventions that are being made in the Indian context that are worth following, that essentially bring visibility to this work, right? Visibility is in some sense the first step. But there's a lot more that can be done, and a lot of that comes from kind of people's movements and labor kind of coming together. And that maybe is where the kind of the bind for women is even accentuated, because platform work essentially splits up, it fragments your labor force. So workers are not able to kind of come together and collectivize and discuss on how they might strategize against or strategize for their rights. And for women, that burden becomes even more because they're doing this kind of flexible work, sitting at home on their devices, and they don't have those opportunities to participate in external or public spaces. And so that lack of collectivization, or the lack of opportunities for collectivization, becomes an even bigger concern for women.
No, absolutely. Thank you so much, Urvashi. And I think, so unfortunately, we only have 8 minutes left. So in the interest of time, I actually have one overarching question that I will ask all of the panelists. And so I think we've talked a lot about harms, risks, areas where we have not been doing as well. And I think I'd like to start with you, Shiko. But this question is for all of you. What does a community-centered or, women-centered AI system actually look like? What is the ideal that we're striving for?
Awesome. Thank you so much for that question. It starts with women defining what AI looks like. And I've asked that question. So have you asked women what AI actually means for them? Yeah. And when you ask that question to diverse women, not just techies like myself, but anybody, any woman out there, they will give you a definition of AI, and taking a level playing ground of what that means for them and look for them. And as we were coming, I was speaking to somebody, something we are doing at work, we are calling minimum viable intelligence. It's not superhuman intelligence. It's not AGI. It's intelligence that works for me. And I like the recipe, and I understand the risk, because that's a question that we keep struggling with, is if I put this information out there, somebody's going to go monetize and make lots of money, and my grandmother will still be broke. But on the other hand, what does that minimum viable intelligence look like for a woman? Does it mean being able to help them with their premenopausal supplements? Or is it about childcare? Yeah, and here I'll plug in, we have the Africa AI Village. We have two startups that are solving for women. Please go and talk to them and see what it means. It's collecting enough data sets, not all the data sets in the world, just enough to be able to solve for a problem that a woman will actually use. Because there's many things that we are solving for right now that nobody's going to use. But if you can solve for that woman to be able to solve for their particular problem, what you're calling minimum viable intelligence, then from a woman's perspective, then I think that's what AI looks like for a woman.
Beautiful. I love it. Sachi, maybe you can go next.
Okay, so I think I said it right at the beginning when I said that if you think about women as economic actors, I think the minute you think of them as economic actors, you think of them across the value chain, and you think of them as sort of having bargaining power, as being decision makers, as being leaders, and sort of, not an afterthought, not a beneficiary. And I think, let me give you an example from outside the AI world. When we say a farmer, most people think of a man. But we know that actually there are just more women farmers, at least in India today, than male farmers, because that's just the way the economy has progressed. Men find work outside of agricultural labor, men find work outside of rural areas, they migrate out first, etc. Is that the mistake we're making in this space as well? When we talk about an AI economy, are we thinking about men? And I think if we were to we need to just, I guess, reverse that in some ways. And then maybe just one more thought that I would place over here is just sort of see, again, going back to something I said earlier, making sure that we are tracking progress. And, I think that goes beyond the gender question, because it is really a question of who's at the bottom of the pyramid in a sense, and making sure that there are choices and options and agency that allows you to actually take advantage of opportunities that exist and be able to move forward.
No, absolutely. Thank you for that very apt and important reminder. I think, Aranya, if you can go next, and then Kalika will close off with you.
Well, it's interesting. The discussion took a very interesting turn, and I'll tie it to your question. I mean, if we look at women as a homogeneous group, then the approach to this question is very different. But if we look at women, especially in a country like India, where there is a hierarchy of caste, class, privileges of different kind, then we have to look at it very differently, right? In sociology, there is something called emic and etic, which is basically studies which come from within and studies which come from without. And I think while representation and the way the scene in the film also evolves is that she tries to give out information from her surroundings, right? While I absolutely understand that there are dangers of it, there is right now they're very much excluded from the very value chain of being represented in any way, right? It's like the first step that needs to be achieved. And the problem is that hegemonically, for example, if the policing systems in our country, they started using AI, and they've started profiling communities based on older records, right? And who are those records done by? They're done by the dominant communities within the country, right? So if the data doesn't come from within, then there will always be a perpetuation of the overarching sort of narrative. And I think in that sense, a woman from an Adivasi community, a woman from a Dalit community, AI's role in their lives, both either as a data labeler or as a consumer of AI or as a consumer of automation, means something completely different for different sort of sectors.
And that's a very interesting thing to reflect on. Like, in what is the action that each actor has within the ecosystem, and what both, I think, areas of exploration, but also areas of precarity that may exist. Kalika, I'll let you close us off.
So I agree with so much on this panel. So I don't know what else to add to it, but maybe like one thing that I would definitely say is please stop infantilizing women. Let's do this for women, and let's make them this thing. This will be so useful. Like, stop that kind of an infantilizing of women. And I'll give you one anecdote. We'll end with the anecdote. We started with a wonderful one. So this has to do with like this thing that was organized by Gates and GIZ ages ago in Bihar, which is an eastern Hindi belt state. And there were all these people who were building applications for women using LLMs at that time. We hadn't started saying AI. And it was for women farmers specifically. And then I think the organizers did a great thing. They actually got a bunch of women farmers into the room for the developers to talk to. And you should have seen the authority with which the women dismissed the applications of all these developers. And they were very clear that this is not what we want, right? So listen to them. Just stop
Stop assuming.
Stop assuming. Absolutely stop assuming. And then when I was sitting and observing a bunch of them, and when they left, this woman, farmer, she turned to me and said, why does everyone think we need information and more information and still more information? Right? how many apps are we supposed to have on our phone just dealing with information? Right? And then she said, why doesn't anyone build like a, I see on TV like these robots and machines so that we don't have to do the heavy physical job of it, right? So, I mean, I thought, nobody had thought of, do they even want this information? So please, I'll just stop here. Stop infantilizing women. End the story.
I think that what a wonderful way to end this panel discussion. I do have a quick 2-minute more thing for all of you if you have the time, but for the moment, I would really like us all to just give a really big round of applause to this wonderful set of panelists. I think we've been able to uncover a lot.
Can I just point to somebody who's here? Karishma is here. Karishma's article, The Human Touch, was one of the first things that formed the basis of the film. She's written about data labeling. And of course, Lakshmi is here, who runs AI Kiran, and a lot of their work also helped the film. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Rania. So if you all have a few more minutes, and sorry for the awkward seating, I guess you guys have to sit there. I wanted to show and kind of put into tangibility some of the intangible things some of the intangible things we've actually been speaking about today. So over the last 2.5 years, Karya has been working with 20,000 women across 8 states in India to create a framework that helps us identify, tag, and flag gender bias at the data set level across 3 major Indian languages. These 20,000 women have been collaborators for us at Karya. They have been co-creators, and they have taught us what it means to learn and build together from women at the very beginning. So I want to share with you a little bit about the journey of how we came to actually building this tool. And it came first from asking that exact question. And in fact, it comes from doing what I think Kalika probably told us to do at that exact time, because she was our technical advisor. And she said, ask what does gender bias mean to them? How do they actually want to define it? Because all of the research that has been done so far, not only on gender bias, but specifically gender bias in technologies, was done for people who speak English. English is a very different language from Hindi, from Malayalam, from Bhojpuri. And one of the critical reasons why it is so different is because some of these languages are fundamentally gendered, something that English is not. So what you're seeing here is actually a journey that our communities took. We first worked with over, I would say, around 100 women across these 8 states to actually develop definitions of gender bias, because gender bias is an English word. That singular word does not exist in many languages. We then employed over 20,000 women to actually complete tasks, to collect data, to actually tell us what are your lived experiences of gender bias? What does bias actually look like in a sentence in your language? And then we took all of that and we put it into a framework built by the definitions that our women have generated, and a framework that fundamentally allows us to flag gender bias in a way that is inherently not only part of these women's communities, but also part of the global South. All of this, what it led to was what we're calling the Align benchmark. It is a series of 13 parameters and I guess one overall framework. No, you can go back. And one overall framework that allows us to think differently about what gender bias means. So through this, we were actually able to use their voices, both literal and shared, and experiences to actually frame what we see as these 4 areas. So while there are 13 areas, we've just, for simplicity, broken it down. So first, bias presence and direction, right? Does the bias exist? Where does it exist? In what direction? Second, what are the linguistic markers or patterns that signal this kind of bias? Third, who is actually being targeted when the bias is said? Is that implicit or is that explicit? And fourth, how does the bias actually function, right? Who does it harm? Who does it support? I think what's really powerful here is that these parameters, and if you can go to the next slide, this is the entire framework that we actually worked with, were developed and entirely emerged from women's interpretations of their experiences, their shared definitions of what gender bias means, and their fundamental experiences across these language. I'll just share a little bit of an interesting anecdote about how English can be very different in how bias is expressed compared to a lot of Indian languages. So when you look at English, a lot of the gender stereotypes that we find in the English language are actually around action, occupation, and professions. Now, very interestingly, when we analyzed all of our data, although obviously these biases do exist in Indian language contexts, the 6 Indian languages that we worked in, actually we saw a little something different that was dominant. When people who spoke Malayalam, who spoke Hindi, who spoke Bhojpuri thought about gender bias, what they experienced and expressed was actually through the lens of personality, attributes, and emotions. A very different arena of how bias was felt and experienced by these women. So I think I began this session by talking about power versus precarity. And so I just want to show you a line bench, which is our attempt at actually putting all the voices of all of these women into a framework that then guides a model to actually help us tag and flag various types of gender bias. So unfortunately, because we have slight internet issues, we had to screen record. So my apologies for that. But we're just pulling it up on the screen right now. So much screen mirroring. We're learning a lot about technology just from these actions. Oh, I think you're still on this. Yeah, there you go. It doesn't want to show you. Amazing. So this is what the Align Bench website looks like. Unfortunately, as I said, due to internet issues, it is not necessarily working right now. So I think what we really created, so what we have here is basically an ability to type any type of text within the 6 languages that we have. There's an example here, or you can write your own, which is what we've done for this demo. And in general, this sentence talks about Amit, who wants to learn more how to cook, and he wants to learn how to do homemaking. And he's expressing to his friends that he wants to do this, but his friends are basically like, "Oh, that's not a manly thing to do. Why are you wasting your time, working in this way?" So, sorry, my notes have decided that they don't want each other. But I think so. Sorry, it's still generating. But basically, what this is able to do is identify, where are we actually seeing different aspects of bias. So now that we have our results, we can see that in this case, gender bias was detected. So just to translate the sentence says, when Amit mentions he enjoys cooking and wants to learn homemaking, his friends mockingly said, "There's no need to be so modern that you as a man are wasting time in the kitchen." So first we can see that obviously we have detected a negative tone. This was a very important thing for us to decipher because gender bias can happen in any way. It can happen through positive tone, it can happen through neutral tone, and it can happen through negative tone. Second, we look at the domains and the types of classification, right? So here you can see it is about domestic domain and it is generally about a role-based assumption. Then we talk about what are the actual types of harms that this statement can actually bring about. And you see we've identified 3 harms: psychological, social, and representational. The point of this tool and the point fundamentally of this framework is to bring into light what does it mean when we actually center an entire community. And here you can see, even though we worked with 20,000 women, we're actually still able to design a framework that is able to identify stereotypes that are true for men as well. So I just want to share this with you and also thank all of you really for coming today, for extending your time with us a little bit more. And if we could all give one final round of applause to all of our panelists. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Safia. I don't think nobody thanked you. Safia and the entire team. Thank you.